A nursing union will be holding protests demanding fair pay after a survey showed that half of people think that a 3% rise is too little. Well, the Royal College of Nursing is planning what it described as a summer of action across the four nations of the UK in the lead up to its annual National Congress in Liverpool in September. Well, Harry Phone is the grassroots campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. And what do you make of this idea that nurses are going to be protesting what is an above-inflation pay increase at a time when so many people across this country have seen their pay go down?
Yeah, good morning. It's obviously an issue that's going to run and run. I mean, this has also come off the back of the social care funding issues. As you say, it's been an unprecedented time in British sort of economic history. We've seen record borrowing this year. There was a report out just the other day putting the COVID bill at something like £372 billion. Our tax burden is at a 70-year high. We're £2.2 trillion in debt now. It was only just crossed 2 trillion not so long ago. So, and as you say, when a lot of people in the private sector have had to put their businesses and their jobs on hold through furlough, they've potentially not been able to come back to those jobs. They're just trying to get their income back to a level of where it was before this all happened. It can be, a number of them have complained that it's quite galling that they are seeing NHS staff getting a 3% pay rise. In defence of that, though, NHS staff have had a very difficult year as well, and I can understand exactly why they want that pay rise. In fact, they were originally asking for nearer 12.5%, I believe. I do think, however, the fundamental question is, now that the government have offered 3% or are to award 3%, is how are they going to pay for it?
I think that's certainly a big thing. As far as I'm aware, it costs £1.5 billion, which is certainly not a number to be sniffed at. But I suppose this is going to raise bigger questions for the government. If the government, capitulates to pressure to give an above-inflation pay increase, quite a sizable one, costing £1.5 billion to nurses, and then they go and protest that anyway, what on earth is the incentive for the government to offer more pay rises like this in the future?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, look, we all always want our pay packets to be bigger. I mean, who doesn't? And as you say, there probably always will be protests, sort of whatever the government offers. And to a certain extent, you could say, it will never be enough. I mean, there's another interesting thing that comes into play here, that inflation is currently around sort of 2.5%. Now, some people are forecasting that it could be 4% soon. So actually, when you look at it, it could actually be an effective 1% pay cut. But then it does come back to that private sector argument again about, a lot of people in the private sector aren't even going to see a 3% pay rise in their pay. So, let's say they're on zero for sake of argument, they're actually going to see, a net 4% loss. And then there's the question, as I say, about where does the money come from? As we've seen with the social care thing, the government seems to be suggesting that taxpayers have seemingly bottomless pockets and will just, put national insurance up by 2%. And, I'm sure taxpayers can stretch that a little bit deeper. There never seems to be, that if the government does want to pay for these things and do give public sector workers a pay rise, that maybe they should look to make savings elsewhere. We've seen during the pandemic and years before that government and public sector are quite inefficient when it comes to spending taxpayers' money. And I think if they are going to award these pay rises, that they've got to look to make savings. And there's no shortage of places to start. I mean, the obvious thing that springs to mind, I always mention it, is High Speed 2, for example. But then, it's other simple things like public sector IT procurement is absolutely terrible. We did something with the Daily Mail back last year, looking at all types of waste across government departments. In a sort of 8-week research project, we found £5.9 billion of wasteful spending. I'm sure if we dig deeper, the government can find these savings, not have to dip into the taxpayers' pockets, and essentially try and keep everyone happy. I'm not sure how easy that is, though.
Now, I suppose normally the way that we'd fund pay increases is through growing the size of the economy. But we know that the economy today is smaller than it was before the pandemic, despite some quite strong growth in the last couple of quarters. If you're saying it was actually so easy to find huge amounts of government waste, and we know that governments, whenever they spend money, tend to slosh it around all over the place and lose a lot of it, why on earth isn't there an impetus right now in government to see where that waste is, to trim out the fat, and to actually lean up our government?
I don't know is the honest answer, but I really wish they would tackle this. I mean, I suppose you could argue, we've seen with foreign aid the slight reduction there by about £4 billion in these unprecedented circumstances. I mean, that's a good start, and even with those cuts, there's still going to be an awful lot of waste within there. And you mentioned the economy as well, and that's an important thing. If the government are going to sort of pursue this idea of let's raise taxes to pay for things rather than trying to look to make savings, well, we know that tax rises aren't good for our economy. We know that stifles growth. I mean, we've seen the last budget, they're talking that corporation tax is set to go. Now, at a time when, Britain has now left the European Union and it's looking to forge ahead and be this outgoing nation that will also attract business into the country as well, a rise in corporation tax is not the thing to do. It's going to limit investment into the country. Our entrepreneurs may decide to go overseas, for example. Similarly, things like income tax. We saw that the thresholds will be frozen there. That means less money in people's pockets, so maybe they don't spend or spend as much. So the government, yes, you're absolutely right. The government can grow its way out of this problem, and there's two ways it can do that. It's got to be relentless. It's got to have a relentless war on waste, eradicate that wasteful spending. But then also, secondly, it's got to introduce economic policies that will encourage growth. And as we've seen, with corporation tax again, that's been steadily coming down for the last 60 years until fairly recently, but the revenues have gone up. We have to, cut red tape, cut taxes, and that will get the economy booming again. And we can grow our way out of this problem. And then, pay rises for public sector staff become a lot easier to fund.
Well, Harry Phone, thank you so much for joining us this morning on GB News. Very interesting points, and I hope the government will take on board your advice, although somehow I doubt that this government is quite so interested, sadly.
Well, yesterday, the